This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world. We are coming at you from Estes Park, Colorado, and we'll go quickly down the line for those listening. Let people introduce themselves. This guy here, you probably know by now, has been on this podcast many times.
Chester Moore here with Higher Calling Wildlife, the podcast, the ministry outreach, Dark Outdoors, the podcast, Texas Fishing Game Magazine, and all kind of other outdoor products.
And
Cameron Gorbett.
Here we go.
The one and only. So we're out here. I'm doing some film work for Chester for Higher Calling Wildlife. And the last 2 days have been absolutely absurdly insane. Well, Chester, why don't you tell them briefly what we're out here doing before we get into the nasty details of the last couple of days?
So we're actually filming a documentary. Paul is an incredible documentary filmmaker, and we're filming a documentary about our work with Higher Calling Wildlife to bring the love of Christ to hurting kids through wildlife encounters. And we're going to be working with a couple of kids. We're trying to get a bunch of wildlife footage and the field footage for this beautiful documentary that also ties into wildlife conservation. And then kind of on the outskirts of that, we're trying to do some fly fishing.
We've done a little bit of fly fishing this morning.
Yeah.
And so Cameron here, he's been baptized by the wildlife photography world in the last few days. What's it like, man? What's it like going from not a lot of photography experience to going to wildlife straight off the gate? What have you kind of enjoyed about it so far?
I love just seeing the animals up so close and getting to capture them and seeing the images that come out. I'm from Southeast Texas, so all I see is deer and armadillos and hogs. Yeah. So, I got to see elk for the first time in wildlife, besides not in the high fence, and then the mule deer, and seeing the elk chase each other, seeing mule deer fight. It's unreal.
What's it like going on one of these trips with Chester Moore? Is there any downtime?
No, there's not. He said, "Hey, we're getting up at 6:45." I said, "Okay, cool." So I set my alarm for 6:45. I hear his alarm go off. Mine goes off, and he just turned on the light. I'm like, "All right, I guess we're getting up now."
Yeah, that is the Chester way. We were getting ready this morning. We're like, all right, we're gonna go down to the lobby, grab some breakfast, and Chester walked to the door, heard an elk, and that didn't happen. We just went and filmed elk since the first second we went.
I heard an elk, boys, let's go.
So yesterday was a wild experience. Today is what, Tuesday?
I think.
Tuesday. Yeah. Today's Tuesday. So I got off the plane. We all got off the plane Sunday late afternoon. Yeah. Immediately left the airport, went to, what was the place?
Rocky Mountain Arsenal.
Within 5 minutes of being there, we got footage of whitetail, prairie dogs, bison.
Yeah. We saw mule deer way out. We saw some mule deer as well.
So that was pretty cool. 5 minutes in Colorado, we're already seeing all this insane stuff. We get to where we're going, some casino thing
in the Black Hawk
Casino in the middle of nowhere. And then we wake up, we head out, and we head to, what was it?
Mount Evans.
Before we even got to Mount Evans, Chester just spots these sheep off in the distance, like half a mile off the highway. So we pull into a side street.
Sort of. It's like a little side street. My spidey sense is kicked off, and they're at the highest alert when there's a bighorn around. And so literally like half a mile away, I go, there's bighorn. So I made a weird turn, and we ended up in a neighborhood on the edge of these foothills.
And shot video of wild sheep.
3 rams.
Just chilling behind some lady's house.
All full curl. Full curl, really nice rams.
Huge animals, and they were super cool to see. What'd you think about that?
So my first animal I got to take pictures of in Colorado was 3 bighorn sheep.
Yeah.
So, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah, that's great.
The first animal I took a picture of was just like some bird in Ohio. So, that was awesome. And then we go to the mountain. We're driving up, just cruising elevation. Thing that surprised me the most, I've been to Colorado once when I was like maybe 18. Mm-hmm. We got out of the car way up there high, and I was having a hard time breathing. I was like, usually, running around with the camera and stuff, you're walking at a pretty quick pace, and I was like getting winded and getting lightheaded, which was cool, but not that. I mean, it was just weird to be up that high. And then why don't you tell them about our little sheep experience there on the side of the road?
Yeah, so we're at Mount Evans, and Mount Evans is the tallest paved road in North America. And but you can't, it cuts off at one of the lakes up there right now this time of year. So probably at like 11,500, 12,000 feet. And we see a couple of ewes and a couple of lambs up on the road, and then there's some up on the mountain. And we just kind of pull over about 75 yards down from them. And I'm getting position, and this ewe comes to check us out. And I say check us out. All of us were at least within 5 feet of her, and Paul was within about 2 feet at one point. And we didn't approach them; they approached us.
Yeah, and you were standing there, Cameron. You're just like chilling by the car, and all of a sudden, I look over, and they're just like a foot from you. Is this wild sheep?
100%. I have a picture, and it's just like, 2 or 3 feet away from me, super close. And I was like, I could have reached out and touched it. It was really cool.
It's cool for me because I've seen over the last couple of years that we've been friends, Chester, you come here all the time, like maybe once or twice a year. Yeah. You have all these awesome sheep photos. And then we're driving through stuff like, this is where I took this photo. This is where I took this photo. I'm like, this is just like a grand tour of Chester Moore's life. And it was awesome because the wildlife here is very accessible. Yeah. I will say that.
Yeah, that's the ticket really. When we were looking for a place to start doing expeditions for kids and higher calling wildlife, some of the kids that go through special challenges, whether it be critical illness, parental loss, foster system, we wanted places that had epic beauty, accessible wildlife. You could literally drive around and walk maybe 100 yards or whatever to see something. And when we found between Estes Park, which is my home away from home now, Mount Evans and all that region, we found that. And it's funny you mentioned going back, but I'm just as excited as the first time I was there. I mean, the day I have a bighorn ewe 5 feet from me, when I didn't solicit that encounter, she solicited the encounter. If I ever get tired of that, something's wrong. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and then the cool thing for me is you see a lot of wildlife photography, see a lot of wildlife video, and for me, it's always seemed very inaccessible because these places, from where I live, are very far.
Yeah,
and there's this impression that wildlife video and photography is very difficult to do, especially these big, epic North American wild game animals. Like you're talking wild sheep. Hunters, all they talk about is how hard they are to get, how hard they are to shoot, how hard they are to find. And then you're in the park and they're almost running into your car.
And we did see that this morning, actually, in not the Rocky Mountain National Park, but the park across from Lake Estes here. And I have a photo of a Suburban being smashed by a 6x6 bull elk, which was pretty epic. So you have like human-wildlife conflict. But in all honesty, most of this is managed pretty well in terms of people and wildlife when it's so abundant. I mean, I knew this was my happy place. And I hate that word happy place, but it became my happy place the first time we came. And me and my wife were here on our anniversary, going to Starbucks. And we had to literally wait for a herd of elk to get out of line at Starbucks before we got our drinks. And I'm like, I can do this. But I think you're hitting on something that like people do see this and think, oh, I have to go backpacking into Denali somewhere to get this. But you can find it in a lot of these really accessible places, you know, and don't let the elitist snobs tell you can't do it because you can do it and have a great time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. I don't want people to get the impression I'm saying that these animals aren't hard to hunt because they're very difficult to hunt. But at the same time, to have a chance to photograph them, see them. So yesterday we saw from when we woke up to when we went to bed, and either of you chime in if I miss anything. We saw wild sheep, both rams and ewes and lambs. Yeah. And we saw what are those marmots?
Marmots.
We
saw a pika.
Pika. I didn't see that, but chipmunks. Ground squirrels. We saw elk. We saw whitetail. We saw moose. We saw mule deer. Yeah. All within a 12-hour period.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Were you surprised by any of that?
All of it. I didn't know what to expect coming on this trip. And this morning, like, we walked out the door and you hear an elk bugling within like 5 seconds of opening the door.
Which is why we left early to bail out. Yeah. And like, there's an elk. It's bugling us.
Yeah, so for me, the elk call is just so wild. It's like they have this high pitch and then they have this low grunt. And I've heard it online a million times. I mean, I follow a
Yeah.
bunch of elk hunters and stuff like that. But to hear that in person,
Yeah.
it's like a powerful call.
It's a lot different.
What'd you think of that? You got a picture of that guy almost getting nailed in that Suburban this morning. What'd you think of that?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. That elk was very aggressive. And, we stepped out to take pictures and video, and he started coming towards us, and Chester was like, y'all, you need to get in the van right now because we're going to get charged.
Well, to be fair, Chester wasn't worried about us. He was worried about the rental car.
Yeah, the insurance doesn't cover elk attacks, literally. So I didn't want to have to cough up a bunch of money. I'd have let Paul get nailed a couple of times for a good video. That would go viral.
Yeah, he would have videoed that.
Sure.
Photographed
and he'd
that.
have been mad if I didn't.
I would have been. I mean, I should be more concerned than I am because those things are freaking huge.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, I'm willing to get the shot. It's just insane the amount of wildlife plus the fishing side, which we haven't talked about yet. We got up this morning and went to the guide. What was the name of the guide?
We fished out the Estes Angler.
Yeah.
The Estes Angler, yeah.
His name was Chase Martin, I believe.
Okay, yeah, and we were out this morning, first thing in the morning, fishing the Big Thompson River, Big Thompson Canyon for trout. We all caught trout, which is cool. That was being here in Colorado was the first time I've caught a trout. And then people that have been listening to my podcast know that I've been talking about fly fishing a ton.
Yeah.
Locally, to me, there isn't a ton of fly fishing opportunities. So to come here, I still don't want to say trout fishing is easy here, but it's a heck of a lot easier than where I live, where there's no trout.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado has notoriously snooty fish. I've never killed them here when I've been here fishing, but I've always caught a few. And we got diversity. We actually caught hybrid trout this morning. It was a cut bow, so half greenback cutthroat and rainbow trout. Rainbow trout. Of course, we have those here, greenback cutthroats, brook trout, and brown trout. So,
Yeah, I caught a brown trout this morning. I caught a cut bow, which is the hybrid.
Yeah.
And then I kind of almost caught a rainbow. It got away. It got off right when I tried to put it in the net. I'm so used to doing bass on the fly that you just horse them out of the water. And like you can't do that with trout. So I lifted him up to put him in the net and he's just like, see you, dude. So it's like a half fish, I guess. But it's cool to catch that many different species in one thing. And, Cameron, you're relatively new to fly fishing. You said you have about an hour total of fly experience. Now you have 5 hours.
Right.
You got 5 hours under your
Yes,
belt.
yes.
So what did you think of trout specifically?
I'm used to bass, redfish, using obviously conventional tackle and
Very
rod
Texas
reels.
of you.
Yes, very Texas of me. And so Chester got me into fly fishing not too long ago and gifted me a fly rod and fly reel. And I've caught a few bass on a fly, but it was in a pond. The pond's not moving like these streams and rivers are. For one, it's a very beautiful view. I mean, outside of catching fish, the view that you get here it's unreal. You're looking up at this 800-foot tall mountain while you're sitting there fishing. That's really cool. But also the trout, it's just a whole lot different than bass. Like you're using a popping cork for redfish. That redfish takes it under. You set the hook on as hard as you can. And this morning the guide, like you said, my little whatever you called it, the
Top water fly or whatever.
yeah, it barely went under and came back up, and he was like, "That was a bite." It's like, really? I'm used to it going under quick, and I never see it again. And so it's a lot different. It's a challenge, but very good experience.
Yeah, I mean, Chester, you have a lot more experience with fishing for trout, but I had the same thing. I'm so used to fishing in lakes for bass and ponds. I'm casting far. I'm casting, and I'm out there trying to cast the other side of the stream. He's like, they're gonna see your line and they're gonna spook. So he's like, keep your line up. So I'm doing these little tiny short casts. I spent the last friggin' 6 months practicing for these magnificent, river runs through it, 50-foot casts. And the guy's like, no, we don't do that. I'm fishing from here to the camera or whatever. It's 8 feet, 5 feet. So that's a whole different experience. And then, trying to detect these little tiny mini bites where it looks like it just hit the riffle weird and went underwater. And he's like, that's a bite. And I'm like, how? I mean, that takes a lot of experience to know because you don't feel them.
That drives me crazy because I come from Texas. I fish for bass every week at some point on the fly. And you'll get some little tiny bass bites sometimes, but there's something on there. You got there is something on there, with these things. And that took me a long time. I haven't caught tons of trout on the fly. I probably caught 150, 200 over the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, I've caught like 4 total.
But I've also done it in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. So a lot of different places. And a lot of that was in Yellowstone when a bite was on in Oklahoma. So that's the bulk of my fish. But every time it's that detecting thing. But I have to look at it from Cameron's perspective of like the beauty is part of it. It's like you're immersed in the experience. But also, we've talked before about how fly fishing and bow hunting are very commonly linked in a way because of like, you have to pay so much more attention. And even regular fly fishing, but trout, you got to even pay like way more attention. And I am not a great trout fly fisherman. I want to be one. And, but I love it. I mean, every time I see that beautiful fish on the line, tied on the line, it just makes my heart race,
Well, it was interesting for me because the trout that I caught that cut bow, I would say, I don't know, maybe it was 7 inches, 8 inches, 9 inches. I'm not really sure. It's kind of, it's different because you're trying to keep them in the water. You're not really handling them very much. Quick picture, they're back in the water, like not really good at, but they're like smaller than a bass, the ones we've been catching here. Yeah. And a fish of that size, if it were a bass, would be bending that rod over, tugging you down. And I'm fighting this fish, and he's like, if it runs, let it run. And I'm thinking like, I don't even feel it pulling on the rod, But it's more of a finesse thing, which is essentially what fly fishing has always revolved around. I just got a weird introduction with it, like I have with everything, because it came through Chester Moore, and every time he introduces me something, it's in the weirdest way possible. So it's great. And
unconventional, man.
Unconventional. I started with bass and bluegill, and those are fun. And the looks that I get from people when I've told them I've been fly fishing for 6 months and I haven't caught a trout, they're like, "What do you mean?" They're like, well, I went to a conference the other day, all these fly fisher guys. I was like, I've never caught a trout. I've caught a ton of bass, bluegill.
I know someone who's very high level in the fly fishing world in terms of the dealer and that side of it, and they will openly tell you they hate trout. They hate them, and they live in a good area for it. They're all about the bass, and I love the largemouth bass, and because it's a very accessible. And I actually recommend, if you want to start fly fishing, you don't live in a traditional trout area, maybe you have to wait on stockings in the winter or something like that, bluegill, bass. You have a lot of fun, I love it.
I'm a bluegill aficionado.
Yeah, you are.
I love fly fishing, bluegill. But beside the point, we're here in Colorado, you do what they do in Colorado, and that's fish for trout. I was surprised we were able to catch 3 different species of trout in a day.
We're going to catch 4. We're going to catch brook trout tomorrow. I'm telling you, we're going to have to some brook trout tomorrow.
And I think that's just cool. I mean, I'm not a big species chaser. I just like to catch fish, and it just happens that being around specifically Chester, you end up doing a lot of stuff now I take a fly rod everywhere because it's easy to travel with, which you're learning now, Cameron. Yes. And it's kind of addicting because you're like, all right, well, I'm going to be in the ocean, which I was just in the ocean in Alabama. Like, oh, I'm catching these little Jack Crevalle and that's a cool fish to catch. I'm adding another species to the list, but that's not why I'm there, and it's just a fun sport in general. But on the side of wildlife photography, we were talking about this in the car yesterday. And we've talked about this a little on the podcast in the past, but I'll get Cameron's perspective. You hunted a little bit, and wildlife photography is in a sense just hunting with a camera. Yeah. You're not taking that life, and it's almost just as rewarding. Like, you don't get the food at the end of the day. Yeah. But what's it like to, have that camera in your hand and use it as a tool to capture these beautiful animals as compared to stalking them with a gun? Because I get just at you guys saw me yesterday. I'm holding my breath on these shots because if you screw up, you miss it, it's out of focus. It's done. They could go away. So how does that compare to you?
Yeah, I think just being out in the outdoors, being in God's creation, that's really cool. That's one thing I enjoyed about hunting. I hunted public land, it wasn't very successful, but I enjoyed just being out there. Yeah. And so getting to be out here just to take pictures, I think it's just as cool. My wife asked me yesterday, she was like, which do you like more, hunting or photography? And I was like, I think I like their photography more. I mean, it's you get back and I can't wait to put in my memory card in my laptop and look at all the pictures that we got from the day. It's rewarding.
Yeah, and for all you hunters out there, don't worry. It can be just as expensive. Don't you worry.
I'm friends with Ted Nugent. He would not, he'd whack me upside the head if I dissed hunting. But no, we all three of us love to hunt. But a friend of mine, Thompson Temple, gave me some great perspective one time. I gave him a beautiful photo, the first bighorn I ever photographed. And I said, Thompson, I'll probably never get to draw a permit. I certainly can't afford an outfitter hunt for a bighorn. But that was really exciting. So, if you read the Bible, when David was running from King Saul, he snuck into Saul's tent. He didn't want to kill the king, but he cut his robe to let him know he could have killed him. He said, when you get close enough to that bighorn or that elk to get the photo you want, that you need, that's just like taking a shot. The only difference is you didn't take a life. And that really gave me a good perspective on this. And it made me realize it's always been as fun to me. And I will give you this much. It's a whole lot cheaper. Even if you buy expensive cameras, it's a lot less expensive than a lot of that. So I have to, because I do it in media. I work in the wildlife media world. I have to have photos for my blogs, for my articles, for covers of Texas Fish and Game. But even without that, I was shooting wildlife photos when I was 16, 17 years old. And it's always been exciting. And it's cool to see someone who just now kind of got, and his wife's a photographer. There's like wedding photos and all kind of cool stuff like that. But see someone come in and be like, oh man, that's just as cool as being out there hunting. That's fun.
It's cool to watch you get excited because we pull up and you're like the first one out the door. It's like, bam! I'm still trying to like gather my gear and like figure out what lens or where I'm going to do. And he's already out there like, which is good. That's what you want. That's how you learn too. And like, I get a lot of joy out of it because like you said, at the end of the day, you don't have to buy a tag. You don't have to, transport a lot of stuff. A camera can fit in your carry-on. We were talking about this in the car yesterday, which I thought was really cool too, is like you don't need a $7,000, $10,000 camera body either. I mean, sometimes when you start in wildlife photography, it's an advantage to have a not a crappy camera, I guess isn't the word I'm using, like a crop sensor camera or something. You're going to get a better focal length out of a lens. You get a 600 millimeter lens or something for $1,000 and you get a $300 camera body. Yep. You're getting an 800 millimeter focal length and you're getting closer to these animals. And it's just a good way to get to learn and practice. And it's just, you can fly to Estes Park and stay at a cheap place, and you're out like what, maybe $600-700 on a flight in a hotel room.
From Texas, I fly like it's like $200-250 an expensive trip here, and that's one of the reasons in our Higher Colony Wildlife thing we wanted a place that was inexpensive for where we were to travel, because we've never been at the level of our industry where we can ever get a salary. And so we're always trying to like find ways to cut costs. And we're like, man, we can fly there to Denver, drive an hour and a half. And, we got a very inexpensive trip. And it's great. But, I want to go back a minute to the biodiversity of this. All the stuff we're seeing. I mean, the marmots, they only live at like 8,000 feet and up. And that's something you're not going to see anywhere else unless you're basically in the alpine area, the Alps, the pikas as well. And a lot of stuff here that's just not going to be anywhere else other than the American West or the Canadian West. This Western mountain wildlife is if you really think about it, other than whitetail and wild turkeys, this is what every hunter in America grew up dreaming about, this mountain stuff, trekking up to get a bighorn or buling an elk and that kind of stuff. And it's always great to connect to it. And I always bring it back to my childhood, like just flipping magazines open and looking at pictures and going, I want to see one of those. I want to hunt one of those. And that's a great thing about the photography. You can hang that trophy on the wall pretty inexpensively of that great photo. And you have a memory captured forever. And people ask about it. And that's just a great segue to talk about wildlife conservation. I'm always talking about the sheep stuff because I'm neck deep in that and I love that. And talking about how yesterday there was some girls from the Denver Zoo at the parking area there by Mount Evans. And they had, you will never hear this, it's an exclusive right here, a gallon of mountain lion urine. And they were taking the mountain lion urine to spray around these areas where the bighorns can congregate and the mountain goats, because they're kind of concerned about them mixing. They worry about the goats maybe giving disease to the bighorns. I'm like, lady, don't spray that near me. We want to get bighorns to see us. You know what I mean?
I wanted to let her spray it on me, but you wouldn't let me.
No, I'm gonna do that
because we had to be in the car together. Yeah. But I think this place is really unique of all the places I've ever been. It's like very diverse and very compact. Like we saw all this stuff within an hour's drive.
Yeah.
I mean, there's if I drive an hour in any direction in Ohio, I still can't find trout. So like the amount,
Me too.
the amount that of stuff that we're seeing here, like to wake up and hear elk outside your window after, 2 weeks ago, I mean, I'm a few thousand miles away from elk is pretty insane to think about. And they're just like all these iconic Western species. I mean, I think if we see a bear and a turkey, we'll pretty much have covered every piece.
I think maybe tomorrow evening we have a good chance where we're going to go and maybe seeing turkeys. They have Merriam's turkeys here, and that's a great thing. And a bear are fairly rare to see in the area. I've seen one bear in all my trips, but it was the last time I came, and this year has been an epic year for bear in the Estes Park area. So maybe we'll run into a big old bear.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about kind of back to where we started is like why we're here. What is the point of taking these kids out in nature? Because it's important. We all know how important it is to get kids out in nature, like what it does for us, even though we're out here running 15, 17 hours a day doing these gauntlet trips and stuff. It's just like when you get back, it's like a refreshing thing for your spirit, whatever you want to say. And like, so what, like with these kids, what do you see, I guess? What is the change that you see in these kids?
Well, our whole mission is hurting kids. So the kids that are most marginalized, the most hurting, that have been through hell on earth maybe 2 or 3 times, those are specifically who we target. And just living the dream of being able to pursue wildlife and the journalism thing all these years, I've had all these experiences. And when I felt rough, when I had personal things going on, it would refresh me. It was a place the Lord could refresh me, was in the wild. And so we had kids. We have a program called Wild Wishes. It started 9 years ago, and that's to grant wildlife encounters for children with critical illness, loss of a parent or a sibling originally. Now we even work with girls that have been through sex trafficking and some other things as well. And we had some kids in that program kind of ask about all this conservation stuff that I had like hanging on the wall. And I thought, maybe let's try to connect that, so we thought about ways to teach young people to use photography, video, social media to promote conservation. Give them something that they can sink their teeth into, because kids who are hurting and marginalized can relate to wildlife that's imperiled, And so taking them out, because what I've noticed is if someone loses a family member on a March 16th of 2023, their life and their mind never will be better than that day. It's like, or got a bad health diagnosis that day. This is a way when they encounter something like a bugling elk or a black bear or a moose that they've only seen on TV and they experience it in the wild, it lets them know that good things can still happen in life. And that's really the overarching picture right there.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I know it's the same thing for me. Like yesterday, I mean, it was cool. Like you are very into the bighorn thing. Yep. That's like you are obsessed with it.
Yep.
I've like just never thought too much about them. I know I've interviewed Gray Thornton and stuff and Renee Thornton on the podcast. And, it's really interesting. But that stuff was always so far away to me. But like, I don't know why the elk are awesome. But I see a ton of elk on social media all day long. And it's like, I'm not downplaying them. They're majestic, gorgeous animals, but the moose is like so underplayed on social media. I don't know what it is about the moose, and that's something your wife and I have in common. That's one of our favorite animals.
Yeah, my wife Lisa, on our first trip up here 4.5 years ago, fell in love with moose, and so did I. Became her very favorite animal immediately, and it's like their poetry in motion walking, and they can disappear like that. They like last night. They just big mooses in front of us, just bam, gone, and that's an animal you and I both need to research more on conservation purposes. I did learn something that because of some rising temperatures, that they have a hard time cooling down, and that's causing problems. I've also heard things about because of warmer winters, more ticks, things like that. So there's conservation even for moose. Let me tell you something. If you've never seen a moose, it is one of the coolest things you could ever experience, because it's like you see an elk and they're huge, and then a moose rolls out and you go, oh, that's the king of the woods,
Well, Cameron, what'd you think of the moose, man? We didn't see you. Once the moose came out, Cameron was gone. We didn't see him until it was like time to leave.
Yeah, the moose was unreal. That's one thing I've never seen at all, like including like high fence stuff in Texas. And so to get to see one fairly close, I mean, he wasn't that far away, and see him just walking. And then we lost him for a minute, and thankfully we got him back. We're able to take some more pictures. And then we just see him bed down, and he's just chilling next to this pond in the middle of an open field, and it's so crazy to see. It's unreal.
Yeah, I was blown away by the moose because it was funny actually. I had a thing pop up on my Facebook memories or whatever, and it was like there's this picture from 7 or 8 years ago when I was on the Appalachian Trail of the moose outside of my tent, which I've told that story many times. Amazing, took a picture of it. It was close enough that I took a picture with a GoPro. So that's how close the moose was. That was the last time I've seen a moose. And, you know, that's kind of when I fell in love with those animals. Mm-hmm. And like you said, they're very, I don't even want to say they're charismatic. They're just so big and like they don't care. They're not worried about you at all. They're just massive. Like you can see on the video I took, they're just a huge ball of muscle. Yeah. And they move so gracefully through this really rugged terrain. I mean, even like what they're walking through is not flat or stable ground. And the fact that we saw the moose, we ran out of the car after it trying to get video because light was dying real quick. And this moose just disappears before our eyes. There's like 4 trees in the whole field in this whole open plain. And we lost the moose. And Cameron's an eagle eye. He found it like really quickly. And I'm like literally running with like a 600 millimeter lens and a giant tripod up this hill, like trying to get this moose. And I don't know what it is. And that moose we saw was black, which is I've never even like considered. I'm sure I've seen pictures of black moose, but I've only seen up in New Hampshire and stuff. They're just this brown color. It was a dark moose, and it was so cool to see. And that made the trip right there. Like if that's all we would have seen, I would have been very happy. And I don't know why I just love that animal so much. And they're just not like, I think it's because they're kind of elusive. They're just kind of like elk don't care. Elk are out here in the middle of the freaking parking lot. They don't.
Literally, there might be one behind us.
They're like I know that if you're watching this on YouTube, it's blown out behind me. There's not much I could do about it. But I try to get some of the scenery back there. But there's elk down the hill. There's elk in the freaking parking lot over here. There's elk everywhere, which is wild to think about. But the moose is just like they can just be so nonchalant and chill, but they also could snap you in half without thinking.
Yeah, I was here last year, maybe 2 years ago, and watched on that same pond a cow and her baby. And the baby was off in the reeds, and she was eating in the middle of the lake. And this coyote took 30 minutes trying to get over there to that baby. And I'm like, you're going to have a horrible day, my friend, if you make it over there, because she is going to kill you and stomp you. And, very aggressive defenders of their young. You got to realize moose come up in, grizzly country and all that. There's bears everywhere. There's gray wolves in most of their habitat. So they're an animal that has, once they get big, you have to take a massive wolf pack or a big grizzly to tackle them. But there's not a whole lot that messes with them. And they just command a lot of respect.
Well, they say they're the most dangerous animal in North America. They are very aggressive in the rut, and they're very aggressive when they have the mothers with their children. Yeah, they're very aggressive animals. I would not want to be like a bulldozer trying to chase after you at like 50 miles an hour. Like they are monstrous animals, and I don't know. I love them. So yeah, this trip has been super epic so far, and we're literally only halfway through it. So I can't wait to see what the rest has to offer. I know here pretty soon we're going to meet up with one of the kids. We're going to do some filming. When a few months down the road, probably what we're doing right now will be released as some sort of documentary. And also, before we kind of wrap up here, unless there's other stuff you want to talk about, Chester and I have a documentary from last year that's coming out here really soon about the first time I ever went fly fishing and did not catch any trout on my fly rod that time. So we made up for it this time. What was you kind of approached me. This is all based around the Hunt Fish Podcast Summit, which Chester and I are a big part of. And we always try and maximize that time because the summit's in like a middle end of the week, kind of like a Thursday through Sunday ordeal. Mm-hmm. So we try and meet up early and get some stuff done filming wise. So what was your premise? Because you led the reins on this one. My friend Seth and I did the filming and we were in it, but you kind of took the reins on like writing it and the narration. What was the premise and what was the purpose that you wanted to release this documentary project?
Taking barriers out of fly fishing. Really, it was about, because you think of some doctor or lawyer on the water and he has all the Orvis gear and everything. That's great, but most of us can't afford that. And I think a lot of people think because of that, I'm not a great fly fisherman. I'm an okay fly fisherman. I manage to catch fish because I know a lot about fish, and we wanted to show people that anyone could go do it. and that it's fun. And you don't just have to fish for trout. We fish for other things as well. And that it's something that anyone can get involved in. And even if you've been a fisherman your whole life, it can revitalize your fishing. You know, it has certainly for me. I've been fishing my whole life. I've been fly fishing since I was probably 20, a little bit, you know, but I hadn't probably did it in 15 years at all. And then COVID came. And I thought, you know what? I got these ponds by my house. I really don't need to catch another 2 or 3 pound largemouth on a crankbait. I'm gonna get the fly rod out. And then it became a rabbit hole, neck deep in it, or actually far in it. So it was really, the documentary is about that. And we want to present it that anyone can use that to enhance their fishing life or just their life in general. And you don't have to do it the traditional way.
Yeah. And that will be out. So this podcast will be out before the end of September. So this documentary will be out within the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
So we're really excited about that. I will put links to it and stuff either in this episode or whatever on my social media, Chester social media. We'll put it out there so you guys can watch it. We put a lot of work into it and we're very excited about it. And we're working on this documentary right now.
Yeah.
And then we got some other ideas coming up for you next year. And it's all about accessibility in these more elite sports because that's what we do. I mean, I started with a cheap combo and a fly chest pack, and now I have 8 fly rods, and it is all your
Paul
fault.
is way deeper on the gear side than me, but we've partnered with someone, Captain Scooby of Mudfish Adventures, and he makes some incredible fly. A day before I traveled, I got one, and I met him like 2 hours from my house to pick it up halfway, and I'm like not even home. He's like, "You caught a fish on it yet?" So I went and caught one in a pond and a bass and showed him. But he makes great gear. And you're using his, what is this thing you have?
So, long roundabout story. I met Captain Scooby at the Hunt Fish Podcast Summit.
Yep.
They were like, he was like, after it was over, he's like, I need help editing this podcast. I'm not a tech guy. All of you guys said, Paul. So here I am. So I helped him edit his podcast. And in return, he sent me a couple of fly rods, which he's custom made. The 5-weight, which you have a similar rod, is amazing. The Mudfish Adventures fly rod. It's a 5-weight graphite rod. I know in the past I said it was a fiberglass rod. There was some confusion in the thing. It's a long way to communicate between Texas and Ohio. Things get confused and they talk a little slower down
Texan.
there.
No.
So that rod's great, but the one I brought here is called the Purple Perch Plucker, and it is a purple 3-weight fiberglass rod. It glows in the stream. It's a beautiful rod. I caught 2 fish on it yesterday. I plan to catch a lot more on it here. And for trout fishing, I think everybody's traditionally with this 5-weight rod.
Yeah.
I'm loving it on the 3-weight because it feels like a little bit bigger of a fight. I'm not catching these mammoth friggin' browns that people show on Instagram that are like as big as my forearm. You know, it's just these little guys up the creek. And it's been a fantastic rod. It's a little bit more to get used to on a 3-weight, and not the 3-weight itself, but the fiberglass version.
Yeah.
Takes a lot longer to do a cast. But yeah, I've really enjoyed the rods. I don't really endorse products a lot, but these were given to me, but for exchange of work. But it is a beautiful rod. I mean, compared to the combos I have, and
he makes great stuff. And what the interesting thing about what he does, he's based on Toledo Bend Reservoir, which is definitely not a traditional fly fishing area. It's a traditional, like 7 years ago, it was ranked the #1 largemouth bass lake in America. And it's always in the top 10 the last decade, according to the Bassmaster chart they use or whatever. And that's another thing I think we like Captain Scooby because he's very non-traditional as well. And we just want people to know, because what happens is, we were talking about this earlier, a lot of people's outdoors experience is graded on other people's opinions. And and we were talking about how people will dog somebody because it was illegal deer to shoot. And it was, outside the ears or whatever. So it'd be legal in East Texas or whatever we live. But it was at 4.5, 5.5 years old, and we want to shut up, okay? Seriously, just let people have a good time in the great outdoors. You know what I mean? Because I'm going to say this. Here we go. I'm going to rant. This may be a small rant. Okay. What happens is every guy who's going to rant because you didn't kill the mature enough buck or whatever has never spent 10 cents on conservation. That's their big conservation, that the buck got a year older. You know what I mean? It's not but like whitetail need conservation help a whole lot. You know what I mean? They haven't spent that. So what I tell people is this: if it's legal and it's per standards of where you hunt, harvest it. Don't let someone, whether you're hunting or fishing, dictate what you enjoy in the great outdoors. Me and Paul love to catch panfish. Some people are like,
Love it.
Some people are like, oh my God, it's not a trout. They pull harder pound for pound. And we have a lot of fun with it. So whatever you enjoy, and I think it's important to say this now because we have a lot of people post-COVID that have never fished, never hunted, and are new at it. I met someone on the lake, I was fly fishing, who was out there fishing, and they were having to use an app to tell them what to do. They had never done it before. So we want these people to be open with, open with us. We open with them in exchange of information. We'll help them out. Hey, I don't know how to do this. We'll do what we can to help you, point your way to the expert, but also try to get them toward being part of this conservation ethic of all this, because we're going to need it. Wildlife's in peril in a lot of places. We're going to need help.
Yeah, and it's very much so based around region because like whitetail might be in low population in one state, and then the next state over, where I live, they encourage you to shoot does because their population's too high. It's over carrying capacity. They're coming into people's yards and eating gardens, and they're destroying native plants to the point where they're having a hard time building populations of these native plants and stuff because the deer are just mowing them down because there's just too many deer. So I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole for 10,000 hours. It would be.
It needed to be touched though.
No, and I agree. And the gear thing too is like I always talk about how the gear doesn't matter, and I think you really hit on the head earlier. And this is something I think everybody can take away is like I've seen you catch more fish on a $35 fly rod.
My Martin combo that I bought at Academy Sports and Outdoors. I've caught peacock bass, various species of cichlids. My largest bass I've ever caught in my life on a fly rod a few days ago, probably a 6-pounder, and a lot of stuff. And the reason is I'm a bull in a china closet. I travel and drive a lot, and if I break a $50 combo, that's okay. But I haven't broke one of those yet. I have broken a more expensive one. So, maybe start what you can afford. And then if you want to go up and do, if I'm going to be bone fishing, I'm not going to be bringing that, but otherwise don't let that be a barrier,
Yeah. And that's the same way I said I have 8 rods now. 2 of them are custom rods that were built for me by Scooby. Yeah. The rest are like cheap Reddington combos or something, which is perfect because I'm traveling a lot. I'm fishing in a lot of different scenarios, saltwater, freshwater, this and that. It doesn't have to be this like huge expensive ordeal. But like I was telling you guys, I bought this stupid $200 freaking waterproof bag because it was literally the only option that they had out there because I said, I'm going to fall in the river. And what did I do this morning?
Fell in the river.
Ate shit right in the middle of the river this morning, face first. So my bag went underwater. Good to go. Money well spent, but I don't need a $700 fly rod to catch the same. You don't even use the rod in trout fishing, honestly. These dudes that spend $1,000 on the rod, I mean, it's great to have nice stuff, don't get me wrong. But like I cast it at 7 foot in front of me, and then the guide was like, lift up your rod. If they see the fly line, they're not gonna bite it. I'm like, why do I need $1,000 rod to go that far?
We could have literally done it with a cane pole.
I could have done it with the line. I don't need the rod. Yeah. The fish didn't fight that hard. But all right, guys. Well, we got to start gearing up and getting ready to drive out here and meet this kid. We're going to do some filming, and then we're going to go film some more wildlife, carry on the adventure of the week. So thank you, Chester, for bringing us out here and bringing us on this crazy adventure.
Thanks for being part of this and working on the documentary. You guys just being brothers and having a good time, and I'm anxious to see what's beneath the water in the location we were told about today. But we're going to catch out there and what's running around those woods.
You excited about anything coming up in the next couple of days, Cameron, besides going to sleep?
All of it. I think like the epicness of this trip, I'm going to get home and have to unwind for like a solid 48 hours before I can do anything else.
Yeah, we're getting home on like a Thursday night at midnight or something. I'm going to be like, Friday is a no-go for me.
Well, Friday, I'm going for the Greater Houston Christian Outdoor Fellowship over to Lake Calcasieu in Louisiana. I'm doing a devotional at night, fishing a tournament with them, friendly tournament the next morning, doing a devotional that night and Sunday morning.
You don't count though, because you're not a human, I don't think. Something is not wrong with this guy. So, all right, we're gonna get ready to go. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with another episode.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. If you're getting anything out of this, if you're learning something, if it's helped you in any way, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. Throw me $1, throw me $2. We greatly appreciate it. Just using it to keep this ship afloat. So thank you very much.